Hi, I'm Anthony March. I'm running for the 15th Congressional District against John Shimkus, hopefully. I am a lifelong resident of this district. I grew up in Paxton, Illinois, which is about as far north as you can get and still be in this district. I currently live in Danville with my wife and my 2 young daughters. I'm a high school math teacher. I teach at a small rural school district in southeast Champaign County. And really kind of getting around this district, growing, yes?
What's the name of the school?
Heritage High School. Yeah, there's about 170 kids in the school, so it's a pretty small one. Having traveled around this district, having grown up in a small town, teaching in a small school district, I've really seen that one of the biggest issues that everyone has is how can we kind of bring economic growth to this district. And this is something that this district is really kind of suffering from. The US economy has been growing for the last couple of years, but Illinois in general, and especially this district, hasn't really seen the same growth that everywhere else has. Half the counties in the state of Illinois that have higher than a 6% unemployment rate are in the 15th district. And this is something that should really be unacceptable. This is something that our current representative, I don't think, is doing anywhere near enough to really kind of fix. And I think if we want to try to get economic growth into this district, there's really kind of 3 things that we need to really work on. Make sure that we have modern infrastructure, make sure that we have good K through 12 schools, and make sure we have adequate health care. I think kind of the easiest one to connect to the economy is infrastructure. And I think if we really need to get the business conditions in this district that are going to attract businesses, are going to keep businesses here, we need that basic infrastructure. If we don't have the roads, the bridges, the rail networks to bring in goods, to take them out of these areas, businesses aren't going to come to these towns if they can't get there easily. Another thing is there are a lot of places in this district that don't have adequate access to like broadband internet. And this is something that a business is really going to need. Like I said, I teach at a small school district, and we only are about 25, 30 miles from Champaign-Urbana. It was only like 3 or 4 years ago that we actually got high-speed internet in our school. And there's probably a lot of schools and a lot of towns that don't have access to that. And that's hurting business competition. That's hurting our kids' education, because there's a lot of things that having the internet really helps in the classroom, even if it's something just like putting in grades. I remember there was a lot of days like on finals when all of us were trying to put in our grades at once that we like broke the internet. And this is really something that in the 21st century shouldn't be happening. And this is something that we can work on. Another thing for infrastructure that is kind of less towards the economic side, but really kind of improves the lives. And this is making sure that the public utilities that we all kind of rely on are up to date. We saw this happening in Flint. A lot of these pipes, they're lead lined, they're old. We need adequate, either just replacing those pipes, making sure our water treatment systems are up to date. And this is something that as a country that we are really lagging behind in, is just those basic infrastructure things even like that. I think every 4 years, the American Society of Civil Engineers puts out a report card on American infrastructure. And for at least the last like 3 of those, the United States has had a D on the report card. And every year, the amount that they say it's going to take us just to get up to basically passable on all of our, well, I guess a D is passable, but average on all of our infrastructure, just keeps going up. I think 2016 was the last time they put out this report. I think over the next 10 years, they were expecting it would take $4 trillion of investment just to basically get our infrastructure up to like average. And we've basically had almost zero, after adjusting it for inflation, federal infrastructure investment for about the last 10 years. And this is a problem that's just going to get worse. And this is things that if they go wrong, things that we rely on, electricity, running water, could go down. And it's something that we should get fixed. And this is also a serious public health issue. And like I said, when we saw this in Flint, and there's a lot of other places that it's not as big as that, but there's schools that find lead in their drinking waters. their drinking fountains. And this is something that, as a country, we shouldn't find acceptable. And it's something that we need to start investing in now before these problems get worse and worse. The next thing, if we really want to have economic development in these things, we need high quality public education. As a school teacher, this is something also very important to me. I've been in the classroom for, I think this is my 11th year teaching. Most of that I've been teaching at, like I said, a small rural school district. I did teach for a year in Danville. So I've also taught in a bigger school. My wife still teaches in Danville. And I've really kind of seen that we can do a lot more with our education. And this is something both in funding and unfortunately at the federal level, there's not a whole lot that we can do about funding. That's mostly a state level issue. I think roughly about 10 to 20% of school funding is federal, however, and this is something that we definitely need to expand. The NEA just recently put out a report on rural school districts, and rural school districts get about 60% of the funding of the average American school district. I think it was about $6,500 compared to about the $11,000 per student that a school district spends. And this is something that I think the federal government can do a lot more. A higher percentage of funding for rural schools does come from federal grants, and this is something we definitely need to expand to kind of help fill that funding gap, because there's a lot of students that aren't getting the education that they really need because of that gap. And I actually just recently read something that I found kind of vaguely appalling. We're one of 4 basically rich countries in the world that spend more to basically educate the wealthy than the poor. And the poor already have so many kind of strikes against them that that's something that we shouldn't be doing. We need to get more funding into those low-income schools, make sure that they're getting the education they need so that they can get into college, they can get a good paying job, and kind of break out of that cycle of poverty. And education is really the place to start with that. And another thing that we really need to work with, and this is something else the federal government actually does have some influence over, is making sure that we have teachers in our schools. At the beginning of the summer, the state of Illinois had over 1,000 unfilled teaching positions, and this has not really gotten significantly better as the school year has gone on. I think the last time I checked, which I think was about last month, there were still about 600 openings, and that's probably subtracting a lot of them that have been filled by long-term subs. And I've seen this in my school district. Over the last 5 years, we've gone through 3 Spanish teachers that we've lost, and right now our Spanish position is filled by a long-term sub. And this is something that's common in a lot of the school districts in this country, in this state, and is even more prevalent in both, like I said, those low-income and those rural schools that really find it hard to, because of the lower funding base, to compete with benefits, salaries, to keep those teachers. Pretty much all of the one Spanish teacher we lost to retirement. The other 2 basically found better paying jobs in other school districts, so they left. And this is something that if we really want to make sure that these schools have high quality education, we need to make sure that those teachers are staying there and that we have high quality teachers. And one thing right now that the Department of Education, at least in every budget that the Republicans have put out, is they want to slash funds to programs that give incentives to teachers to go into teaching and to go to these hard to staff schools. And those are things that we really need to expand, because this is a serious problem. Like the state of Illinois during the summer actually had to cut the requirements to be a teacher to make it basically less rigorous to be a teacher so that we could get people into the classrooms at all. And this is something, once again, that if we really want high quality education, we need high quality teachers. And then the last thing is we need high quality health care. And if that both makes it easier for people to find good paying jobs, they're less likely just to find a job that's going to give them health care, more likely to leave to pursue a better job if they have less of a worry that they're going to lose their insurance, they're going to get sick, something bad's going to happen. This is also just more directly related to jobs because there's a lot of small towns that still have those local hospitals in them. And those hospitals are very, very susceptible to going out of business if they have to take in a lot more uninsured care. And this is something we saw when over the summer and the spring when they wanted to repeal the ACA. The amount of people who are going to lose Medicaid and the ACA insurance, there were hospitals all over the country that's like, we're going to go out of business if we have to start paying out of pocket because they still have to treat these people if they aren't going to be insured. And because a lot of those rural hospitals, they don't have margins to take in that uninsured care. And this is something that a lot of the states that didn't expand Medicaid, they're already seeing. I think I read something in North Carolina. There were so many rural hospitals that either closed or started closing down things like maternity wards, that there were mothers that had to travel an hour, hour and a half to see an OB. That there were mothers that were basically going, okay, do I just have to hope that I can give birth at home rather than avoid driving an hour and a half to the hospital and just hope that the baby doesn't come while I'm on like the highway. And this is something that, once again, in the richest country in the world, we shouldn't be having things that we have to make mothers decide, are you going to go to your prenatal appointment? Are you going to give birth at home? Or are you going to have to worry about losing your job because you have to take a whole day off work because you're driving 3 hours round trip to get to the hospital? And one way that we can do this is basically make sure that we're expanding healthcare, making sure that everyone has access to affordable healthcare, making sure that we keep having doctors, keep having hospitals and clinics in all of these areas. And then, so that's kind of working towards my main 3 points for kind of, I think all three of those things are just going to make this district better. I think all those will also contribute to helping the economic situation in this district. And then just kind of to close, why I decided to run. When my wife asked me why I wanted to run for Congress, I told her, if I get elected, I think I can help people. I can help people in this district. I can help people in this country. And I think this is something that too many of our politicians forget, that that's really what their job is to make this country better, make their districts better, not just what's the bare minimum I have to do to get reelected. And I think that's something that we especially see in this district with our current representative, is that it's basically, what do I have to do to get reelected, and what do I have to do to not get a primary opponent against me? And that's about all that he's really working for. And there's a lot of problems that are in this country that, once again, richest country in the world, really should be unacceptable. We have basically the highest child poverty rate in the developed world. 1 in 5 of our children are in poverty. We have some of the highest maternal and infant mortality rates in the developed world. We basically have the highest inequality in the developed world. And these are all really records that I don't think anyone wants to have. And these are things that we really need to be working towards. And these are things that there are solutions out there that we can fix. The Democrats in the Senate just recently introduced a bill that I think currently isn't going to go anywhere, but for a fraction of what the Republicans want to spend on their tax cuts, could basically cut childhood poverty in half. And all they have to do is expand the child tax credit, make it more refundable. And this is something that even has some bipartisan support, because this is even something that a lot of the Republicans in the Senate wanted to work into their tax plan. It didn't happen, but we could make significant improvements in serious problems that we have in this country. But I think right now there's just not a lot of emphasis on that. And I think that's something that I really want to work for as a representative, is make sure that those problems, that they're affecting a lot of people, that there are solutions that are out there. Basically, every year think tanks come up with tons of plans on how we could reduce poverty in this country. And we need to start implementing those, because these are things that hurt our economy and they really hurt these people. Because once you're in poverty, it's really hard to get out of it. I think, once again, I was just reading something recently. If you grow up in poverty, basically, on average, you're going to make 40% of the median income when you're an adult, which basically means you're still going to be in poverty. You only have basically a 10% chance, or let's make sure I get the percents right as a math teacher. This would be sad if I didn't. You basically have, it's actually not 10%, you have 25% of the chance of basically making it into the top income rungs than if you were born there. And this is something that I think a lot of Americans, that we're proud that we've always had a lot of economic mobility. And this is something that over the last 30 years has really kind of gone away. And this is something we really need to bring back, to have that American dream that no matter where you are in life, you can make it out of there. And I think that's somewhere that right now, that's not the case. That you're pretty much, if you're born into the top of the income bracket, you're going to stay there. And if anything, you're going to keep moving up. You might move from the 20% to the 1%. But if you're born in that bottom 20%, it's really hard to get out of it. And this is something that we need to fix. Thank you very much for listening to me. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them.
I have a question. When you're talking about, there's a lot more money given to upper income schools rather
Yes.
than low income schools. What constitutes a low income school? Like, are we in Coles County? Would our schools?
Generally, schools are measured on low income by the amount of their population that's on the free and reduced lunch, which I can't remember what the income cutoff is for that off the top of my head.
I guess the question is, in District 15, do you know how many?
Off the top of my head, no. I know that, should have looked this up before I came. You can actually find out if you go to ISB's website, the Illinois State Board of Education. If you go to the school report card, one of the things that they have is the number of students that are on free and reduced lunch. I know that in my school district, it's about 35%, I want to say. I think to be measured as low income, I think it has to be higher than 40%. I know that in Danville, it's about 50%, and I think most people in the district think that's underreported, because that's one of the problems with measuring it off free and reduced lunch, is that that's fairly often, sometimes pretty drastically underreported, because people either just don't turn in the paperwork, or they're embarrassed to turn in the paperwork saying that they need this kind of help. Because I think, at least in Danville, most people think that the percentage is closer to 70%. And this is something that most of the places that I've looked in this district, it's somewhere right around about 20% or so.
I think Mattoon is 50%, and that was several years ago.
Yeah.
I think it's gone up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely been a percentage that's been trending up over the years.
Well, I mean, we
Yeah,
noticed
Coles
that.
County statistics are, I mean, is it Gillespie that did the statistics recently? Somebody around here did. There's a chart on it that you can look up, and it's awful. Just
Yeah,
childhood poverty in Coles County is horrendous.
Yeah, that's also one of those things that as you basically get farther away from like big cities, childhood poverty rates generally are much, much higher than average. And same thing for things like I said, like infant mortality and maternal mortality.
If they're wanting to pour more money into low-income schools, are we going to see that? That was kind of where I was headed with that.
I'm not really sure, like I said, off the top of my head,
That's okay.
if this district, I actually think that Charleston is actually one of the better districts in this district as far as poverty rates go, from what I vaguely remember when it's been a while since I've actually looked up the numbers.
And I had another question question about, you're talking about attracting businesses by improving infrastructure.
Yes.
Which isn't funneling money directly to businesses like tax breaks are.
Yes.
So is that how you see attracting businesses rather than monetary?
I think that's a much better.
incentives, I guess?
My problem with tax breaks is that they tend to be very short term. So it's like, we're going to give this company like 5 years of tax breaks to get them to build a new factory here or move their headquarters here. And we've seen this happen a lot in the state of Illinois, that they've given big tax breaks to corporations to try to keep them in the state. But once those tax breaks start expiring, basically the same thing happens again. The corporation just goes, okay, now that the tax break's over, I'm going to leave, unless you just keep going.
But would it be better if we had the tax breaks not expire? Because then they'd stay, but isn't the point of having a business is
Yeah,
getting the money in our community from their taxes?
yeah, I think most of the tax breaks end up, I think if a politician tells you that the tax break's going to pay for itself, generally they're wrong. The tax breaks very rarely keep more money than they're losing tax-wise. I would say the benefits of those would be that there are other benefits of having those jobs in there other than just tax revenue. I think if you're looking at tax revenue, tax breaks to keep corporations places is generally a bad idea. I think there are some places where that can be helpful. Like there's tax breaks to get people to hire veterans, to hire people who are the long-term unemployed. I think trying to direct tax breaks to build businesses for more, that have goals other than just keeping the business in one spot, I would say those have a better track record and accomplish more, because if you're just trying to say, keep this business in Illinois or keep this business in a certain town, like I said, tax revenues, those never work out. Those are always losing money. But I think if you're really working towards specific like social goals, like you're trying to get people to hire more of certain groups of people, I think they're more effective there, because you're not really expecting to break even on that. Your goal is to get long-term unemployed people, for example, back into the workforce. And I think that is a goal that I would support if we have something other than just, how do I look good, trying to say I can keep this business here rather than it moving right across the state line or something like that.
So District 15 is a very rural district. How are you going to sell yourself to the farmers in terms of what you can do for the farming communities and for farming in general, et cetera? Do you have a plan that might sell to that group?
Yeah. I think one thing that I think we're really seeing that a lot of farmers are very unhappy with the current administration with is their views on basically trade agreements. And I think a lot of trade agreements have gotten kind of a bad rap. I think if they're well negotiated, we don't really have to think of them as like a zero-sum game. If we make this trade agreement, all of these jobs are just going to flow overseas. I think if they're well designed, we can both kind of help our businesses here, and trade agreements are fantastic for rural areas, for farmers, because one of the biggest things of almost every country, that if they still have a lot of high tariffs, they're high tariffs on food, on their agricultural products. And really opening up those markets would be great for our farmers. And farmers were very unhappy when kind of the Trans-Pacific Partnership fell apart. They're extremely unhappy with what Trump right now is doing with NAFTA, because farmers have very large markets in both Canada and in Mexico for their agricultural products. And if NAFTA falls apart, that's going to really hurt our farmers really bad, because lots of these countries are already basically setting up trade agreements with other places that they can get their agricultural products from. I think Mexico already has been signing trade agreements with South American countries to import their corn from there instead of here. And I think we need to really have a more focused view of trade than what we're getting right now, where I'm going to say this is bad until I visit China and now China's great. Because this is what Trump's saying right now, is that, oh, China's trade practices aren't bad anymore because they threw me a big party. And I think we need to have a more consistent view of trade so that we can work towards the goals we need. And I think making sure our farmers have access to foreign markets is going to be essential to them both keeping the prices of our grains, meats, basically survivable for them, because we've been seeing basically the price of a lot of United States agriculture products has been plummeting because there's a lot of worry that the markets for that goods are going to shrink a lot. And I think that's something that I think a lot of farmers right now are really, really worried about.
What are your feelings on health, some form of national health care or Medicare for all?
I think that's something that we really should be our goal, to work towards something like that. I'm right now kind of on the fence on how that should look. I'd really like to see more studies on what works, how it would work. I think it really comes down to something like Medicare for all, where we just have like a single payer system, or how it would work if we just did some kind of strong public option, where we still had private insurers, people could still get them, but we basically had some kind of still government program that people could buy into, kind of help with rate setting, things like that, and make it so that there is a big health insurer that we can really kind of negotiate with hospitals, with drug companies, to make sure that everyone is getting fair prices. Because right now, with how the insurance system is, if you have a big insurance company, you might be able to get a lot better prices than if your insurer is a small insurance company. And I think that's something where the federal government can really help a lot, is with those rate setting. But right now, like I said, I'm not really sure which one would be better in this country. I think some kind of strong public option would be a lot less disruptive, because that would be something that a lot of people who get their insurance through like their employer could just kind of buy into that, and they wouldn't really see a difference. When if you move to like a single payer system, even if that's basically the same thing as like that public option, I think we kind of saw this with the ACA, where just kind of having that disruption, even if their insurance was better, if it was cheaper, if it was the exact same thing, just the fact that it was changing, I think, made a lot of people uncomfortable. And I think that's something that I'm kind of worried about with something like a single payer. That's why I'd really like to see kind of a comparison between the two. And this is something that, as of right now, there really hasn't been a lot of like research, either through like the CBO or through like larger like think tanks, of like, how would this look in this country? And I think if we look at foreign countries, this is something where we can really see models of both of those situations working well. If you look at like a Canada, or to a certain extent like the UK, you can see kind of that single payer system working. But you can also see, like, I think like France does this, Japan does this, where you have like basically a government offered health insurance that people can buy. They can also buy private insurance, either a supplement to that or instead of that. That also works very well. And basically all of those countries have much better health outcomes than we do, and spend a lot less money than we do. So I think there's a lot of good models out there for both situations, and I think that needs to be studied more, of how that would be implemented here in this country. Because I think right now there hasn't been a lot of good analysis of what would a bill that had like how it's going to be paid for, how it's really going to be implemented, what would that do to insurance rates, to health insurance costs in this country. And that's something I'd really like to see more of. Because right now. I think both of those could work well in this country, but I don't know which one would be better right now.
What is your energy and environment policies as far as fracking and renewable energy?
I think we really need to be working more towards renewable energy. I think this is something that we were making a lot of good progress for over the last 8 years. The amount of coal plants has gone down, improving fuel efficiency and things like that. We've seen the amount of CO2 that the United States has produced really decrease over the last 10 years or so. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if that's going to keep up with the current thing, at least for the next 3 years or so, but I think we really need to be moving away from fossil fuels. I think that's not good for the environment. We've seen this. If we really want to avoid having serious climate change, that's something that we really need to be moving away as fast as we can now, and not in 10 years, 15 years, when a little bit more of the oil or coal is used up out of the ground. And I think there's a lot of room to expand into renewables, especially in this district. There's a lot of places that wind energy is very useful here. Farther north, they've built a lot of big wind farms there. And I think we could even get solar here a lot more than it is. And I think that's really what we need to be working towards.
Your district has a lot of
It does.
coal and oil people that depend on that for their
Yeah.
living. So how would you do that for us?
I think that's somewhere where we need to both, something that if we could bring more jobs in this district, I think would help, because there would be jobs that they could move into. I think we also need to be working more on job training, because I think unfortunately in the near future, no matter what we do, those jobs are going to continue to decline. We've already been seeing this over the last 50 years. The amount of jobs in the coal industry and oil and gas and things like that have been declining, especially in the coal industry, because automation has been taking up a lot of those jobs. And this is not something that's going to go away no matter who's president. So I think this is something that we need to work to have replacement jobs for them, and make sure that we have job training so that if they lose their jobs, if they choose to work somewhere else, that they can get skills to get into another industry.
Specifically on job training, do you have any ideas how to go at that?
I think this is somewhere where community colleges have done a very good job of. We have a lot of really good community colleges in this district and a little bit outside of the district, and I think this is somewhere that we really need to expand, make sure that people can get the money they need to go there, because I think if you don't have a degree, if you've only had a high school education, you can get an associate's degree even from a community college, or you can go take some classes. That can open up a lot of possibilities for you. So I think we really need to make sure that we're keeping those community colleges funded, and we're making sure that we give people the ability to go there. Because I think that's a great resource that's both local and high quality to get people that job at training.
What do you think about other renewable energy sources like ethanol?
That's also something that's big in this district, but I think from if you're just going off climate change from CO2, how ethanol is currently produced is not actually very good for the environment, because the process of producing ethanol is not very clean. And that's one of those energy sources that's one of those things that clean ethanol is always 10 years in the future. There's always, we can make it from is it sawgrass, I think, or make it from cellulose, but that's always like just a little bit in the future. I think that's something that might be a short-term thing, but once again, it's not really a long-term solution to anything because
So we might have to find new jobs for oil workers.
Yes.
Oil people,
I think
and
so.
Farmers producing corn for ethanol.
Well, I think that's the thing is that at least for the corn, I think there's markets for that corn other than producing ethanol. I think that's not as serious of an issue. I think if we don't have ethanol plants, farmers are still going to be able to sell their corn.
Is it going to drop the price of corn now?
Possibly. But I think that's once again why we need to then make sure that we're opening up more markets for those farmers so that they can continue to sell that. Because
Well, we'll be providing jobs with the wind and solar.
yeah, and I think that's something that if we can really work into building more of the wind and solar, that is going to produce more jobs.
How well developed is your campaign? Do you have a campaign manager? Do you have funding mechanisms? And
I
plans?
don't.
A ground game or?
So far, I've just been trying to get out as just myself and meet as many people as I can. I'm trying to travel around and get to as many places in this district as I can. I think I've made it to about half to 2/3 of the counties, and my goal is to make sure I get to every single one of them. And then I think as I can get more funding, that's something that I want to really expand is kind of like staffing, but that's something that until I can kind of get my name out there a little bit more and make sure that everyone actually knows that I'm running, because I'm not sure if everyone knows that we actually, as I go to different places, it's always like there's 3 people running for this, so there's always like one of us that someone hasn't met before. Make sure that I can get out there, and I think some of those other things will start coming together a little bit more.
I think that's an important, fundraising is important because
Yeah.
even if you win the primary, I don't think the Democratic machine is going to give you a
No,
district.
in this district, it's not a priority by the Democratic Party. And every time that I've basically contacted anyone, it's basically been what they've told us is that this district isn't a priority. From like the Democratic Party down to even like unions and things like that, they don't really want to put a lot of resources into this district, at least right now. It might change if in like May one of us is polling well against Shimkus or something like that. That might change, but I think as of right now, especially with there being a primary going on and then it just being this district, that's something that's tough.
Kind of an orphan district, aren't we?
Yeah.
What would you say would be maybe something that Shimkus might go after you, or find a way that, oh, I think this would be a good way to hit Anthony, with his ad campaigns and all that sort of thing. Do you have any predictions?
I was like, other than just being a Democrat?
I'm not asking for skeletons in the closet. I'm just,
Well, I don't.
something that you sort of predict. Well, I mean, you're not.
I don't. As far as I'm aware, I don't have any skeletons in my closet, but who knows? But I think the thing that I think a lot of the redder districts, I would imagine that how the Republicans are going to go after it is that, oh, these are just like high tax, high spend Democrats that want to take your money and are just going to drop it off a cliff or something like that. And I would go with that's probably really what he's going to go for. And then just from following what he says, I think his plan right now seems to just be how closely can he tie himself to Trump. He seems to be very much, I'm Trump's man.
He also spouts a lot of religious sort of things.
Yeah.
That's the word for it.
It's the only
Yeah.
thing he tweets, religious first.
But
Yeah, so I guess people must like that in this district, the fact that he's a holy man of some sort.
yeah,
Makes himself.
but I would imagine that's going to would be the attack, would be kind of the stereotypical, they're Democrats, they just want to take all of your money, and then
Well, you're an
who knows what they're going to do it.
intellectual elite also.
I'm not the math teacher, but
Yes.
strike against me.
That's a big strike.
Yeah.
Yeah, public education.
Anthony, what did you think about the idea of running as an independent and not using the Democratic label?
That's actually really, really hard at like the district level, because if you're not as a registered party, it's significantly harder to get on the ballot.
As far as the number of signatures.
Yeah, as far as it's
probably unachievable.
yeah, it's from like
It's about,
it's worse than that.
it's about 20 times more.
Yeah, it goes from I need about 520 signatures to get on the ballot. If I wasn't running as a established party, I think I need somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 signatures.
Yeah.
5 to what?
5,000 to 10,000 signatures. I can't remember the exact number. I think it might actually be higher than it. It could be closer. It could be higher than that. Yeah. It's
Because if you're running as an established party, you need 5% of the number of voters that voted in
you need 0.5%.
That's right, 0.5%. 0.5% of the number of voters from that party
And if you're
who voted in the last election.
yeah, and
If
if
you're independent, you need 5%
percent of the total, yeah.
And since
0.5 to 5.
it goes from 0.5 to 5, and from
And
the
it goes
number
from-
of your party to the total.
So
And
it's-
since there aren't that many Democrats, it's way more than twice
Yeah.
the number of people.
Yeah, so it might actually be closer to like 15,000 signatures or something like that. It's
Very much stacked
Because
against
somebody,
you.
if I recall, his name was Gary, somebody actually got, I thought, over 20,000 signatures and he didn't make it.
Yeah.
Because they
it's really tough.
eliminated so many.
Yeah, because there's always going to be some that are going to get struck. Yeah.
So it's the same in our close county races also,
Yeah.
but it's a little more doable.
It's a little bit more doable just from the smaller numbers, but as the districts get bigger, it's very, very hard as not an established candidate
Do you know
or
how
party.
much dark money Shimkus has in his war chest?
He's got at least $1 million in the bank.
More than 1 million.
Yeah, and that's just from his campaign fund, so that's not even what he could get from like PACs and things like that would run ads for him if there was actually a competitive race. It's a lot of money.
Do you happen to know how much the coal industry has poured into his PAC?
It wouldn't. I don't know off the top of my head, but it would not surprise me if it's a lot.
Do you know, Mercy?
No, it's a lot. It's six figures.
Yeah. Over the course of his 20 years, I would not be surprised if it's
Oh,
not
just
a
this
lot.
last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems like I saw something where it was the NRA and pharma and coal were like his top three.
Yeah.
And it was
Well, he sits on the energy committee, so he gets a lot of money from energy companies.
Yep. Well, I certainly admire you for taking this
Thank you.
stand and your family for the sacrifice that they will go through.
Yes, I always.
That mean there.
Yeah, I cannot thank my wife as too much for how much support she's given for at least just like letting me drive all over the district and staying at home with my two daughters while I drive for hours all over the place. So
Well, and you couple that with being a teacher, which is take home work
yeah.
all the time.
Yes.
What were your thoughts on raising the minimum wage up to a living wage?
I think that's definitely something that we need to do. I think the minimum wage has not grown with productivity or inflation in this country. And I think that's something we really need to kind of raise it up to kind of catch back up to where it should be, even if it just grew with inflation, or definitely if it grew with productivity, which it's been basically, I think up until about 1975 or so, it actually did track worker productivity pretty well. But it's been lagging far, far behind since then. So I think that's something we really need to make sure that we're kind of pegging it to something that it's moving at least with like some kind of cost of living, just keeping up with inflation, but definitely should be keeping up probably with the productivity of our workers too. Thank you all for coming here and listening to me.